I've decided to kind of, in this session, take a little bit of time to just talk about my practice, because, as Teresa said initially, usually they ask an artist who would work with other people to create a work, but I actually felt that it would be really interesting to kind of open up sort of elements of my practice, which quite a lot of it is around thinking about these issues and thinking about how these different elements sit together, the element of the political, the activist, the aesthetics, and how can they kind of, sort of what's the tension between them. So I'm not going to start with my birth, which is good, I only have 10 minutes, but I will say that this whole project made me reflect a lot on when I initially arrived in Britain, and I came as an au pair, which was the only way to come in. I didn't know that you could apply for asylum. They didn't advertise it on MTV. And so I only knew that when I arrived in Britain, and I went and applied for asylum. I'm sort of impressed in this picture about having to go and have a police registration form. I had to register each time I changed a job and an address. I had to give my passport away, and then in return I got this scrappy piece of paper. However, at that time I actually could sign on and get a housing benefit. I could live wherever I wanted. I could do whatever work I wanted after 6 months. All of that, as far as I know, is pretty much scrapped. So this is during the Tory government in the 90s, I just want to point out. So I just want to say kind of what politicizes me. It's the conditions under which I came to this country are getting really bad, and the conditions under which I was in were already pretty bad. So there is a sense of urgency here, and I just wanted to share that sense of urgency. About 2 years ago, I was invited to a residency in Berlin, and the residency was called Journeys with No Return, and it was all on migration. However, I was meant to be in Berlin for 2 months, and in that process I was meant to produce work. I got studio paid, I got paid, so it was all fine, but it did make me feel deeply instrumentalized. I felt, and I started to question who was instrumentalizing me. You know, how do I function in an art system which has a space for a lot of dissent and a lot of meaningful discussions, but it's about agency, who has agency, who represents who, and how is the cultural capital circulated. Sorry, I'm going way ahead of myself. I just draw back to this image. This is my grandparents. They're roasting a pig in front of a factory in Germany. They were guest workers for 22 years in Germany. They left in the late 60s. And, the colours are a bit funny here. Would you mind turning the lights on? They were part of a huge mass migration that was completely organised by Germany and socialist Yugoslavia. And this is where my kind of a little bit of a naive bubble about socialist Yugoslavia, not socialism, but socialist Yugoslavia started to burst. Which is that it was purely organised to get cheap migrant labour into Germany, and it actually worked in a way on both levels. It worked for Yugoslav government because it was a huge unemployment rate at the time, and they didn't want to also make it as that public because, you know, the sort of self-organised workers' control was starting to disintegrate a bit, at least going to a crisis in the 70s in Yugoslavia. So my grandparents left in the late 60s, went to Germany, earned money to build a house, get their pension, and they returned in the 90s. This is my grandmother's words, you know, it's like 22 years in one sentence. And so I'm just going to quickly go, and so this residency served sort of a purpose in which I could actually start to research how do these stories of my grandparents fit into a wider picture of a controlled and managed labour migration, really. And it was really important because I felt that it really marked how we grew up and how I grew up. It really marked their kind of temporality, really marked, and not just my own kind of family life, but family life of so many people. So it's a kind of like a hidden migration that is very widespread. So when I was in Berlin, I actually found out through researching that many women were actually working, and mostly women were employed in the factories, big telecommunications factories in Berlin. So I made contact with various community centres, even had to attend a church mass and various things to get in touch. And I decided that I'm going to actually make it a much, well, I didn't decide, it kind of felt like it had to be a longer term project. So it's been spread over the last 2 years. I've been visiting Berlin several times. I've been visiting the women, interviewing them, and I've been collecting their family photo album photographs, well, mostly scans, to build a form of an archive, because I felt, sorry I'm going a bit fast, I felt that this archive didn't exist. Well, I went through all the archives in Berlin, and I could not actually find much mention. Well, there were a few images, but the images were incredibly sort of kind of journalistic, incredibly voyeuristic, and usually focused on the Turkish migrants. So, in a very kind of us and them sort of way. So I built this sort of very small collection of photographs that I've been thinking what to do about for a while. And I've been asked to exhibit in, and this is me with the women in Berlin, some of them, in the Serbian Community Centre. I've been, the archives, where I've been searching for more photographs. These are some of the photographs that are in there of the women working in the factories. And so I've been thinking about ways to restage an archive as a kind of space in which certain histories could be reactivated. And so I've sort of went through different stages in the project, one of which is this installation archive, and also what I was thinking of ways that people can actually go through those images themselves as a kind of bit more tangible way of engaging with this work. And then I exhibited it in November in a factory that's actually closing down, in a telecommunications factory in Bosnia. And eerily as it was to sort of, in a way, transplant these histories into that space, it kind of reactivated it in a different way. And so I created a kind of collective reading of the archive where people took turns to speak. And that gave me, or triggered, an idea how I could possibly restage some of those interviews that I've done, because I felt that I didn't feel comfortable creating a documentary film where I would just turn up with a camera and record them talking. I also wanted to create a sense of intimacy so that I can actually hear their stories and not be distracted by equipment. So there's a kind of practical element to it. And here it's actually one of the women came to talk as well, and ended up actually speaking about her own experience for herself. I also became interested in this space between a kind of between a documentary, a straightforward documentary, and a narrative and a performance, and how the kind of re-performativity, or it's almost like if you're like repeating something, how does it become your own? You know, is there a way of embodying a kind of stories that are not our own, or that we can relate to? How do we embody those? So I've got really excited about a verbatim political theatre, as I can rediscover theatre. So I went to like 3 trillion shows suddenly this summer, and it just became totally like a kid in the theatre. I didn't go backstage. And sort of just became interested in sort of like creating a stage or creating a set where things can happen. And in a way, this is sort of the space that we're in. It's a kind of set for me in which we could activate certain stories and certain debates. So I'm working at the moment with an actress. How much do you have time? Do I have time to show a quick clip? Okay, I'll show a very quick clip. I'm working with one actress. I'm giving her voice files from the interviews, and she's reenacting them quite closely, but of course it's not a copy. So she's reenacting these interviews, and they're very short clips, and each one of them, well, not that short, about 10 minutes. And I'm also filming myself, recreating the stage or the set. So I'm in the process of doing that at the moment. And I'm just going to play a very short clip, if it works. Okay, it's just a short clip from it, really. So I'll stop here. I mean, I think for me what was interesting working with recreating these stories was that I could start to interfere, and I could start to interfere, create these moments of silence, because I started to think about listening and speaking and understanding, and how to slow down these processes. And so I think I'll just stop here. Just in terms of that, I'll just say one quickly word. So I became really passionately involved in multi-cuts protests, and I don't see this as my practice. I said it to Imogen, and we had this kind of discussion that she said it is. And I said it's not, because it's collective. And I don't want to claim any cultural capital for it. This was our conversation this morning. And I thought that would be really interesting just to bring it out. I feel quite free to not claim any cultural capital. But I do think it's an interesting debate to be had about the kind of protests that took place and I took part in. And I hope they continue, particularly in our institutions that disrupt, like what Imogen was saying. How do we disrupt the space of aesthetics? How do we disrupt these spaces? But then it needs to be done on a longer term. So this is the teaching protest at the National Portrait Gallery, where we stayed in. A few people here stayed with me. This was during the big protest, and the one in January was, we basically came in mass and just started whistling, and a person put down the art strike banner. This is all Art Against the Cuts, organised by them, us. Yeah, the security guards obviously tried to take it down. Anyway, we weren't too pleased about us disrupting the tourists in there. So yeah, I just thought I'll bring this in. This is the new cross-library application. We're trying to stop the new cross-library closing. So yeah, I just thought I'll bring that in as a kind of appendix. Is that the wrong word? Okay, so I will stop.